Hello everyone, and welcome to INST728E for the winter term of 2018. This class is a special topics course from the College of Information Studies at the University of Maryland on social media and crisis informatics. And I'm Cody Bunton, and I'll be teaching this course. In this video, I'll give you an introduction to the course, what we'll do in the course, the kinds of topics that we will cover, why these topics are of interest or important, and then how the course will be structured. First, though, since this is a class about crisis informatics, we want to talk about the different kinds of crises that one could study or one might look at. There are terrorist attacks like the Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris or the Paris November attacks. There are social unrest events, so the Euromaidan crisis in the Ukraine, or the unrest in Ferguson, Missouri, the riots in Baltimore, the Occupy Wall Street movement, or the Arab Spring. These are all instances of social unrest that have varying to social media. And there are natural disasters, from earthquakes to hurricanes to tornadoes or wildfires. And all of these we can analyze using social media to try and gauge public response or extract multimedia or these kinds of things. But first, you might be asking, well, why does social media matter during these times? Is this really an interesting topic to study, or is this mostly just people talking about thoughts and prayers, which are very common sentiments during these times? Well, primarily, people use these platforms, the social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, to some degree Instagram, Tumblr, and 4chan, and others, to get news and share information about these events. So here we have a picture from the Brussels bombing in 2016 at the Brussels airport. This was posted to Twitter within minutes after the first explosion. Similarly, we have this image from the Boston Marathon finish line with the aftermath of the explosion. This was also posted within a few minutes of the event. And then people share aftermath of disaster, a few minutes to several hours to a day or so after the event. So here we see the aftermath of an earthquake in Chile several years ago. So people are using social media to share information rapidly, to share really powerful images of the aftermath of these kinds of events, and to do other things like coordinate relief campaigns or relief efforts, to share information about where people need help. This was particularly popular recently in Hurricane Harvey in Houston, where people were using social media to help guide rescue efforts. And then people in Puerto Rico, when they have had access to social media or power, have been using these platforms as a means to communicate with the outside world. And then increasingly now, people are turning to social media for news, especially in younger demographics, where more than half of young people in the United States are getting their news from social media. Given these interesting events or interesting phenomena, what can we learn from social media during crisis? This is one of the things that we'll be tackling during this course. So we can to understand or get some insight into the central sources of information. So what does this mean? Who are the people on Twitter who are sharing information that's having the most impact? So in the Boston Marathon bombing, in the aftermath, the Boston Police Department became a central source of information, both for addressing rumors and asking the public for information, and overall keeping the public informed and calm. Similarly, during the Paris attacks, local newspapers and news organizations became the driving sources of information. The key is that these were local organizations, local law enforcement or local news organizations. People preferred information from those sources than they did from national or international government organizations or news organizations. We can do other things like extract eyewitness media or images. This is particularly important. Mainstream media may not yet be on the ground or has one particular slant on the coverage. When eyewitnesses can be sharing their images, of the aftermath of an event or the evolution of an event essentially as it happens. And we can capture this using social media. We can build timelines to understand when events occur or identify when a particular event happens and then how this event unfolds over time. We'll see this with large spikes in tweets about events. So for instance, if you look for tweets that mention Boston or Paris, have some relatively small number of tweets, and then the Boston Marathon bombing happens, or the Paris November attacks happen, and then all of a sudden you see a large spike in discussion about these kinds of events or discussion about these places, and that gives you some insight as to when different events happen. We can gauge public response, how this response evolves, what are the conversations or hashtags being used, are people at first scared or angry, and then does that transition to fear or sadness or happiness as law enforcement captures the perpetrators of a particular event, or relief efforts get underway? How does this response evolve? And then we can follow discussions, so discourse like hashtags or individual topics that people are sharing. So in the aftermath of an event, you have different kinds of information that people share, things like warnings about avoiding areas, sharing multimedia about aftermath, requests for help or aid, or thoughts and prayers or sentiment about those affected. We can study how this discourse evolves, what these hashtags are, how these hashtags collect over time, these kinds of things that we will discuss over the course of this semester. So next, who am I? Why am I teaching this course? Why am I a good person to help you walk through this kind of analysis? So as I mentioned, my name is Cody Bunton. I'm a postdoctoral researcher here at the University of Maryland in the School of Information. I work with Jen Goldbeck out of the Human-Computer Interaction Lab, and my work is primarily on social media and crisis response. My current postdoc research is on how communities evolve and then fragment in the wake of disasters, and I'm on a project here at Maryland at the START Consortium for Anti-Terrorism Research, where we look at social unrest or violent and nonviolent events around elections using social media. I got my PhD here from the Computer Science Department in 2016. So that's some insight into who I am, what this class is about. So what are we going to do in this class? So we only have a few weeks since this is a winter term course. So we can't go into a huge amount of depth about the algorithmic underpinnings of topic modeling and LBA, but we can talk about what is possible. So what does this mean? So we'll go through a high-level overview of the different kinds of analyses you can do, and you'll follow along with some analysis that I'll show you, and hopefully do that analysis yourself. And that'll get you some familiarity with the tools that are out there for doing things like topic modeling or sentiment analysis, or data collection for social media, relatively rapid analysis or automated analysis of these data sets, this kind of thing. So where can you get data for doing social media analysis in the wake of crises? What kinds of platforms can you use? So how do you get data from Reddit or Facebook or Twitter? We'll focus primarily on Twitter. And then a lot of this class is going to be about text filtering. So what does this mean? Twitter receives about almost 500 million tweets per day, but the vast majority of those tweets really aren't relevant to the aftermath or studying a crisis of many kinds, depending on your definition of crisis. If you are a Justin Bieber fan, then maybe his breaking up with Selena Gomez will be a crisis, but that's not the kinds of crisis that we're going to focus on in this class. So instead of these 500 million tweets that are posted every day, the vast majority are irrelevant, either innocuous conversation or discussions about celebrities like fans of Justin Bieber or One Direction, these kinds of things. For instance, when I was doing a study on public response to a constitutional referendum in Tunisia, It turned out that a lot of the tweets from Tunisia during this time were about One Direction, because One Direction had just updated their touring list for that year, and people really wanted One Direction to go to Tunisia. So a lot of this is not necessarily useful or interesting for understanding crises. And this is generally the case for understanding essentially any topic in social media. You'll have to do a lot of text filtering, so we'll talk about that. So the topics that we'll cover for this class break down into 10 separate modules. The first 4 modules we'll get through hopefully during week 1. That'll discuss the analysis environment and what Jupyter Notebooks are. So these are the tools that we'll use, or the high-level platform that we'll use to do our analysis and run the code that I'll provide and that you'll write for analyzing social media. And then modules 3 and 4, we'll talk about parsing and collecting data so we can do analysis in the remaining modules. So then in the next group of modules, so modules 5, 6, and 7, we'll do some relatively simple analysis at the frequency level, so how many tweets are posted per day, or per hour, or per minute. We'll use that information to extract interesting video or photos from these events, and then look and see where tweets are posted from in module 7. And then in modules 8, 9, and 10, we'll do some more advanced analysis to understand things like sentiment, what are the different topics that people are discussing, and then the network analysis aspects that we can get with social networks, so who follows whom or who's interacting with whom. And more in depth, like I said, module 1 is about the analysis environment, so we'll introduce Python and the Anaconda framework, show you how to download that and set it up on your machine so you can follow along with the analysis that we'll provide and then do the homework. Module 2 brings in the Jupyter Notebook. So we'll talk about what this is in module 2, but it's essentially a web-based front end to Python and all the tools that Python provides you, along with many other languages as well, though we'll be focusing on Python. Module 3 is about parsing data. So if you have a bunch of files with social media data on your computer, how do you parse them into a format that you can analyze in an automated way? What does that mean, or how do we do that using Python? Most of this data will be in the JSON format or JavaScript object notation format when it's stored in a file, so we'll talk about that. Module 4 talks about collecting data from different platforms. We'll focus primarily on Twitter in this course, so we'll talk to you about collecting data from Twitter. I'll talk to you about collecting data from Reddit or APIs, and I'll talk about collecting data from Facebook's APIs, even though Facebook's APIs are a little different and don't provide the same kind of access that you get with Twitter and Reddit. What appears to be around 5 or 5:30 UTC time, there's a big spike in references to Barack Obama. This suggests that that's when Obama gave his speech about the unrest in Ferguson. So this tells us a lot about when things occur, so I'll talk to you about that. In Module 6, we'll look at extracting multimedia from Twitter, so pulling out images like the one from Boston or the one from the Brussels airport explosion or whatever event that you choose. How do we do that? How do we count how frequently these images are shared? Then in Module 7, we'll look at where tweets are posted from. So these are tweets mentioning or in response to Ferguson, Missouri. We see most of the tweets, as represented by X's, come from the Eastern Seaboard and come from the United Kingdom, with a few tweets from India and the Pacific Coast of the United States. So we'll talk about how we can extract this information, what kind of information is provided in Twitter for location analysis. So some tweets have GPS coordinates that tell you exactly where they were posted from. Other tweets only give you information about the city or general region where they come from. So we'll talk about how to extract those and visualize them. In Module 8, we'll talk about sentiment analysis. So sentiment analysis is taking a piece of text and evaluating whether the author was essentially happy, sad, or neutral in the text. So if you think about it from the standpoint of a movie review, if you analyze some articles, some of your review's text, and the review is negative, then the sentiment in that review would be negative. If the review is positive, then we should be able to understand that based on words like, this movie was fantastic, or brilliantly directed, or something like that. So we'll talk about how this is done in social media, why this is interesting for crises. So Module 9 is about topic modeling. So this lets us break down the conversations around a particular event or a particular crisis into different bins or different sets of conversation. So here we see topic 2 includes expressions of thoughts and mentions of concern, whereas topic 16 mentions prayers, topic 15 mentions Brussels and the metro explosions from BBC Breaking News. So we can use these automated systems for topic modeling to get a sense of the different areas of concern that people have or different modes of conversation people have when they're discussing these events. And we can compare this to things like common hashtags or common tokens that we see that you see on the right about hashtag Brussels or explosions or Zaventem, the Brussels airport. And then in Module 10, the last module of the course, we'll talk about network analysis for things like communities and central accounts. So all these different communities are discussing, or all these different users are discussing the topic of the Brussels airport bombing or the Brussels metro bombing. Who are the central accounts that are participating in this conversation, who are getting the most shares, the most retweets, who become the most central accounts that bridge all the different users together. What are the different communities made up of? So the Brussels metro and airport bombings are interesting because people were covering those events in both English and French. So we get different communities of people discussing the same event that may break down along language lines. So we'll talk about how we can identify these communities, how we can rank these users by their authority, and how we can visualize these network structures. So that gives you some insight into different modules and topics that we'll discuss during the course. But how does this course actually work? How will we coordinate interaction and homework assignments? So I'll be using Elms for this. On Elms, I'll be posting our assignments. That's where you'll be submitting your homeworks at the end of every module or the end of every week. And then also on Elms and in Slack, we'll be having discussions. That's where you'll be posting answers to the questions that I'll be assigning at the end of every week. So things like share some interesting insight that you got from your analysis. I'll post a question like that, and you'll need to respond on Elms, and your fellow students will respond to your discussion posts there. And then Slack is a kind of a chat room-based interface for the web that I'll be using for real-time communication. So if you have questions about the homeworks or questions about the course, I expect you to post to Slack or Elms before emailing me, because if you have a question, odds are one of your fellow students has a question, and if we can identify that in a broadcast way, that will facilitate the course communication. And since we only have 3 weeks, we need to be able to do this relatively quickly. So what is Slack? I posted an invite to Slack on Elm, so in an announcement and in the syllabus. So you can go to ter.ps/EW1 to sign up for Slack. It's free. All you need to do is provide some email address and then a password, and you'll get access to the Slack chat room for us. So Slack is, as I mentioned, sort of a real-time chat framework that can be broken down by channel. And anything that you post on in this channel, everybody in the course gets to see. You can also do direct messages to me that will show up on my phone if you need to get in touch with me about a question that shouldn't be public on the public channel. All right, so that's how we'll interact for the class. How will I grade you or assess you over the course of the winter term? So 80% of your grade is based on a course project. For this course project, you'll identify a crisis level event that you find interesting, and then you'll analyze this event at the end of each module. So what I'll be doing is showing you code and walking you through some analysis that I'll be doing on the Brussels bombing of the airport and the metro back in 2016. Once you've identified an event that you think is interesting, then I'll give you some data around that particular time frame, and you'll follow along with that analysis. So at the end of the frequency analysis module, you'll run the frequency analysis that I provide you on your own event, and you'll submit your results from that. So for modules 1 and 3, since this is primarily about familiarity, then you'll just be posting, or you'll be submitting homework around the familiarity aspect or getting familiar with these tools. And then modules 4 through 10, you'll be focusing on your own event and doing your own analysis based on what I show you. So that's where 80% of your grade comes from. And then 20% of your grade is about participation. So you need to be posting on Elms when I ask guiding questions. So who are the central authorities in your event, or what's the most shared image in your event? You should be posting that to Elms. And then if there are questions posted to Slack, if you have an answer to a question and I haven't answered it yet, I encourage you to help your fellow students because collaboration is a key part of this kind of research. All right, so the course project I mentioned, this is where 80% of your grade comes from. I've already given you some insight as to what that project looks like, but the main thing that you need to be doing for this is to choose a significant disaster or social unrest event or something like that you want to study. It can be a natural disaster like the earthquake in Nepal in 2015. It can be Hurricane Harvey or Hurricane Maria or something more recent. It can be a terrorist attack like the Boston bombing, the Boston Marathon bombing, the Pulse nightclub shooting, the attacks in Paris, etc. It can be an episode of social unrest like Ferguson, Missouri or Baltimore. Once you've identified this disaster, though, this will be the disaster that you'll analyze or do your analysis on for the remainder of the course. For the limitations of our data set, though, the event you need to choose has to happen between 2011 and 2017, because that's where I have most of my Twitter data. And then, as I mentioned, once you've selected this event, I'll give you a sample of data around the time of this event. That won't be filtered. You'll have to do the filtering yourself, and I'll show you how to do that. And then you'll get to analyze this event over the course of the semester. So make sure it's an event you're either familiar with or want to get familiar with, because you'll be looking at it a good bit over the next 3 weeks. Okay, this project can also be group or individual. There aren't very many people in the course. I think right now we only have 8 or 7 people signed up. So if you want to do a group project, that's fine, but I'm going to limit it to only groups of 3. Or up to 3, so you can do it alone in a group with one other person or a group with 2 other people. That's fine. But if you're going to do a group project, you need to let me know as soon as possible. And then I'll post this in Elms, but I expect you to have have settled on a disaster that you want to study by the end of week 1. All right, so now the course schedule. As I mentioned, we have 3 weeks for the course, January 2nd to January 22nd. Week 1 is about modules 1 through 4. That's primarily focused on setting up your analysis environment, getting that all working and running for you. Week 2 will focus on some simple analysis like time series analysis, extracting when tweets occur, and what are the most common hashtags, what are the most common URLs that are shared, the most common images, where tweets are coming from, these kinds of things. And then in week 3, the final week, we'll do some more advanced analysis. This is where sentiment analysis, topic modeling, and our network analysis come from. And then at the end of each week, all the modules that you've covered this week, I'll have homework due for them. So for instance, in week 2, I'll have homework due for modules 5, 6, and 7 that cover the last few questions about, run this analysis on your own data, extract relevant tweets, what are the most relevant what are the most commonly used hashtags about your event, these kinds of things. All right, well, that's an overview of the class. Hopefully that gives you a good introduction about the class. If you have any questions, feel free to post to Slack or post a question on the ELMS discussion board. All right, thank you very much.